So, hello everybody, and what a fantastic turnout. This is lovely to see you all. Can everyone hear me at the back? I speak very softly. Yep, everybody can hear me. Lots of nodding. Hi, my name's Kirsten. I am absolutely delighted to be introducing this phenomenal book to you guys. Yeah, we're in the future. You're going to be really surprised to learn that it's not actually going that well. I think what I'm going to do first of all is ask Rachelle just to plunge us straight into the world of the bunker of the Pharmacist, and from there we'll pick up later.
Do a little reading.
Yeah.
Move my post-its out of the way.
Do you need to hold anything?
No, I'm all right, thanks. In the recreation room, a man was lying on the concrete floor. He was gripping his stomach while his grey boiler suit, identical to the ones we all wore, hung loosely from his body. Some of the Velcro strips had come undone, and you could see the hairs in his chest, the growth thickening towards his groin. I didn't know his name, nor did I recognise him, but there were so many faces in here, and I tried not to linger on any of them for too long. Some of the kids who had been playing a board game surrounded him, and the adults who had bothered to follow the noise stood perplexed. The doctor on duty was Sterling, and he was kneeling beside the man. "What's your name?" "Templeton," he managed through gritted teeth. "Can you stand?" Templeton let out a slow and stifled howl before he thrust his fingers into his mouth. He bit down, and dots of bright red moistened his lips. For a brief moment, I would perhaps have done anything for red meat. Sterling turned to us. "Help me get into my surgery," he said, and 4 men flocked forward, desperate to exercise some of their fading and wasting muscles. "What happened?" I asked. A boy, maybe 13 years old, replied, "We were just playing Monopoly, and he came in and ate the houses." He swallowed most of them, and the hotels too, one of the girls chimed in. I glanced at the Monopoly board. The little metal dog was on its side and the top hat upturned. "When did he eat the pieces?" I asked. They looked at each other. "He swallowed them maybe 30, 40 minutes ago," the girl said. "And you didn't think to do anything?" They shrugged in unison. He wouldn't let us leave," the boy said, kept talking about little fish. "Fish?" "Yeah, the fish that eat the dead skin off your feet." "It made him feel clean," the girl added. "Said he wasn't clean in here." "Go back to your bunks," I said. "Let your parents know you're okay." I turned and looked at one of the bookcases behind me. The literature had been carefully censored. Children's books, light romance, and travel and craft magazines made up the bulk. I picked up a book called Upper Fourth at Mallory Towers, and on scanning the blurb, wondered if anyone actually read this. The spine of the book had snapped in the middle and was only really held together by its cover. I opened the book randomly, and my eyes traced over a few lines, but I couldn't concentrate. There was no shock left in watching someone attempt suicide, but I was struck by Templeton's originality, impressed even. I doubted it was something I was capable of. My whole life had been made up of these moments, envious of other people's convictions. I felt feeble in comparison. I made my way to the bathroom blocks, the only segregated space in the bunker, male and female, any hint of inclusivity from our previous world completely eradicated. Fluorescent lights shone brightly regardless of the hour, and the toilet and shower cubicles were hidden behind plastic curtains, so it was difficult to determine if anyone was behind them. It was only during the night and very early in the mornings that I found the bathroom blocks bearable. Sometimes I fantasise about creeping over the bunker's boundary line and using the opposite side block just to break routine. Perhaps I'd discover something different, like more toilet paper or better water pressure. Trying my best not to let my thoughts linger on Templeton anymore, I sat down in the toilet and stared at my knees. They were hairy. Everything was hairy, coarse and itchy, and I enjoyed clawing at my skin, opening up buried follicles, forcing ingrowing hairs back through the surface. There was the noise of my urine hitting the pan, but nothing more, and I decided I was alone. When I wiped, I imagined there was a glow of light rising up from the seat. Like when my husband Daniel and I had been on a train in Malaysia, and the toilets were only holes that opened out onto the tracks below. There was something liberating about urinating across the land, as though somehow you were fertilising it and hoping it would prosper. The flush was weak. It cleared my urine, but the toilet paper stuck.
Isn't that an absolutely stunning opening? So I read this about 6 months ago, I think.
Yeah.
And I was hooked right from the start. I read the whole thing in a gulp. I had children like banging at the door for their dinner. I was like, no, I am in my bunker. Nobody is coming in. It's such a stunning atmospheric opening to a stunning atmospheric book.
Oh, thank you.
So I was going to kind of ask you. Obviously, we're in the future. Probably not too far in the future.
No.
And our narrator is Wolfe.
Yeah.
Who only goes by the name Wolfe, as everybody in this world does.
Yeah.
And she is the titular pharmacist of our bunker.
Mm-hmm.
When I was sent this book, all I knew was that it was called The Pharmacist. I was only familiar with Rachelle's short film Trifle, which was about a pharmacist, but about a pharmacist in contemporary Pollock Shields in Glasgow. And I was in for a bit of a shock.
Yes,
so let's talk about, where did the spark come from this book in the first place? What was your first kind of point of genesis?
So, I mean, until this book, I was mostly a short story writer, contemporary short story writer, and I hadn't written kind of anything speculative before. But I was in Berlin with my husband, and we kind of accidentally stumbled across a post-war kind of community-sized nuclear bunker, and it was really frightening. And I remember kind of walking, I don't think Angus felt this had much of an impression on him, but I was kind of walking around being like, oh my goodness, I can't believe, like I knew bunkers existed, but to actually walk into one that was huge, it just kind of raised so many societal questions. You know, initially I was like, the fact that governments or people build these with the anticipation that there could be, you know, mutual destruction just really fascinated me on quite a sinister level. And so I kind of was just really consumed by the space, and I thought about it for a long time. It was going to be a short story, and it was going to be called The Politician's Daughter. And then I started to write it, and I was just about 18 pages in on my notebook, and I just thought, this thing is sprawling and massive, and it needs to be a novel. It was a very kind of organic, basically someone saying this needs to be a novel, you need to write this novel. And then I struggled to find the voice, and then I was reading a pharmaceutical journal, because I really didn't like being a pharmacist. I'd always look at the back to see if there was any interesting jobs, you know, like can you go to Bermuda or something, like just like take me away from like a community pharmacy job. And there was a post for a UK-based pharmacist to work on a military base in Germany, and it's like the penny just dropped, and I thought, that's my pharmacist. My pharmacist would be in the bunker. And then once I kind of figured that out, Wolfe just kind of appeared, and she never really let me go. I would say it was her that kind of dominated me, you know. I just kind of had to see what happened and where she went. So yeah, that was that was the start of it, really.
Yeah. How did you go about building up that world? Because obviously, I mean, you've been to the actual bunker. You've got a physical sense.
Yeah.
You've got a kind of an idea of what that would feel like to be in it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of not just the aesthetics of the future, but just the politics surrounding the future as well. Should we talk a bit more about the political situation inside the bunker without spoiling anything too much? So there's a very charismatic leader has led whatever remains of humanity down into this bunker. Yes. And do you want to?
Yeah, well, I talk about it. So the leader is called ND, and he is very charismatic, but he is very controlling, erratic, and paranoid. And I think what I really wanted from the bunker was to just show how, when you are in that kind of claustrophobic environment, even someone that was fairly rational can become quite erratic and paranoid. And it was around about the time, I think it was about 2018, Trump was in power. I didn't know how bad things were actually going to become when I was writing the book. And I remember there being like protests outside the White House, and he would get scared and go down to his bunker. And I just thought, that's so typical, you know, that you put these kind of narcissistic leaders in power, and then they make these decisions that impact all of us, yet they're the ones that get to be safe in their bunker. You know, all of us essentially perish. So I just thought the dynamics of that were really interesting, and it just showed you kind of how self-serving someone like him was. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote the book and sold it before the pandemic, but the more that happened through the pandemic and with, like, you know, Johnson, I just thought, oh, I've written this man that exists. Like, there's several of them that exist. And I was chatting to someone, I was doing this thing for marketing, and it was random readers were reading the book, but they could also ask you questions, and some of them just were like, why would the leader be so nasty? And I was like, well, you could ask that about so many political leaders. Like, look at the war in Ukraine. And once I kind of said that to them, she was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. But to me, it was so obvious that there are these terrible people that we put in positions of power, and you don't realise how much you're giving them or how much they're taking away from you until it's too late, really. And that was the idea. And I thought the bunker was just a really good way of it being like a microcosm of society, and just everything was just pushed to the limit, which you couldn't do really if it wasn't speculative. You know, I felt speculative, you're limitless in the questions that you want to ask about society. So that's kind of where the leader came from.
I like the detail of his much younger, glamorous wife who does exercise classes for the plebs in the bunker as well at first.
Yeah, I mean, art imitates life, really. Yeah. And I think again that was quite a Trump thing. You find these men that are not particularly great people, and they're very driven by looks more than anything else. And yeah, it's just felt very transparent, and I kind of wanted for that to kind of be mirrored onto ND. I also, no one actually knows this, but I called him ND because it's really sad, but it's like a pharmacy in thing to write. If someone doesn't turn up for their medicine, you would write ND as in not dispensed. And when I was writing it, I was like, I'm just going to slip that in there. and the pharmacist will know. Nobody else.
Well, I mean, every single pharmacist in the country is buying this book,
yeah,
right?
I hope so, yeah. I hope so.
So we've got our leader, we've got society. We never actually find out exactly what has happened to get people down there. You don't have to tell us, but do you know?
Not really. No, it was very, and again, that's actually something that irritates. You know, I went through a phase of reading reviews, and people were like, "Why is she in there? I need to know exactly." It's implied that it's nuclear war, but I just wanted it to feel that it could be anything, or that it might not be anything. And you never, no spoilers, but you don't find out that the book is about a bunker. They're in the bunker. And I just like that idea of, it plays with your mind, what's happened. And I don't necessarily think you need to know. I think you just need to understand that it's about survival, and that's the focus. And I think I like the idea, if I'd made it very clear, then Wolfe wouldn't be able to have these kind of fantasies about what the outside world would be like, or questioning her own existence within the bunker. I thought it was more interesting to have the room for interpretation. And maybe because as a short story writer, so much is left open for interpretation, you leave a lot of room for the reader. And so I think I just wanted to kind of transfer that over with the novel, and just feel like I didn't have to explain everything. And if you're happy to go along with that, some people are not happy to go along with that. But yeah, that. And someone asked me at the end, do you know what is the world outside the bunker? And I don't. I really don't. I've left it with Wolfe, and we'll just have to see.
It's actually, I find it quite fascinating because they can't have been down there that long. It feels like they've maybe just been down there about 3 or 4 years.
Not even that long.
No.
Yeah, I kind of in my mind had, I make one reference to the time scale, and it's about less than a year. Really? Yeah, and I wanted it to, I kind of wanted it to reflect that everything crumbles very, very quickly when you're in that environment. Normality disappears, and it really is kind of survival of the fittest.
Obviously, what's kind of amazing about this is it's an incredibly intensely feminist novel as well.
I hope so.
I mean, from Wolfe's position in the pharmacy, and we will get into her sort of specific positions later on. One of the first jobs that we see her doing is dispensing drugs to rape victims. The entire fertile women, there's it's a really interesting kind of version of society that you've got there. So I wanted to kind of get you just unpick that a little bit more. That's not actually a question, it's just a lot of statements.
I think when I was writing it, I always felt that it was, I think someone told me this, I can't remember who told me it, but they said you should be writing what scares you. What is the scariest thing? What do you lie in bed awake at night thinking about? And I wanted to kind of put all those fears into a book and kind of articulate that. And I mean, you can see it now with what's happening with like the abortion rights in America. It felt like very quickly, without realizing, rights are taken away from you. And I think history repeats itself with oppression, and people that are from any minority are always kind of trodden on, and it just feels like society always wants the man to be in power, and if he ever feels threatened, no offence to the lovely men in the audience, it's just when you look at the kind of politics of what's going on and the leaders and the populism, it feels like when those people that are used to being in power for so long feel threatened, the first thing they want to do is take people's rights away. And it's true, whether it's racial or diversity, abortion, your motherhood, how a man sees a woman's body and their use for that. I just felt that was all really important, and I'd never want something like the bunker to happen, but I really believe that is the type of things that would happen to people if that situation were to arise. I tried to be as immersive when I was writing myself. I really people have said the book's quite claustrophobic. I think that's because I tried to live as if I was in that bunker when I was writing it, and when I would come out, I would feel a bit exhausted. I would feel emotionally drained because I had really wanted to imagine what would that be like to live in that environment.
And taking up from that a bit, how did you go about creating the world, I suppose? So we've got the leader, we've got the kind of the politics around it, but the nuts and bolts of world building, because it is incredibly convincing what you've done here. It's it really it does say claustrophobic. I said claustrophobic on the front cover, but it's also you are there in that bunker. It feels like a completely imagined world, right down to the tiny details, rather than just the sort of the broader ideas of politics and around it. So how did you go about building a near future world?
That's it's a good question. I think it was a gradual thing. When I was writing it, I would walk around constantly looking at everything I was doing and saying, how would you do that in the bunker? Could you do that in a bunker? Kind of obsessively. I was probably quite antisocial when I was writing it, because I was like, nobody talk to me. This is what would happen if you were kind of a pharmacist going slightly mad in this confined space. So I think it was just trial and error. I did spend a lot of time thinking about it, but because the character was a pharmacist and I used to be a pharmacist, so much of the details of pharmacy I just kind of pour out, and that really dictated the structure. I was quite conscious of when is she in the pharmacy and what can she do in the pharmacy, and actually I'm glad I wrote it, but it was difficult, because when you write a novel in one space and they can't leave, there's only so many things they can do. And I think one of my favourite parts to write about was when they would go on their kind of imaginary walks, because that was real escapism.
I love that bit. I was actually just about to mention that bit. So there are certain characters, they have a library. They are, the bunker, well stocked with books, well stocked with prescription medication.
Yeah.
Not so much food.
Maybe not the books you would want to read, but censored literature.
But there are these two characters initially who meet up in the library and go to a different country every single time, and they pick the guidebooks, the old guidebooks, and they walk around these areas. And
they just have this, and I really liked writing that, because it felt like the most normal part. And basically it's a woman called Foyer and a man called Webb, and then they kind of invite Wolfe on these adventures. And they almost she thinks they're institutionalized, a bit like prison. They don't know how else to live out with the bunker, but their escapism is to go on these little kind of evening adventures. And there's a dividing line in the bunker, so there's a north side and a south side, and even to the point where they think that if they cross the line, that's them going like across the Atlantic, whereas when they're on their own side, to them that's kind of Europe. So they have it's like a system, and I think that's a really human thing to do, is to try and normalise things and find logic in really difficult circumstances. And I think, Wolfe is a very, very flawed, unreliable narrator, but I think a lot of the things that she does, whether that's go on the adventures or some of perhaps not nicer stuff that she does, I think it's all based in her logic and this madness of the environment, and how the things that she does, I don't think she would ever imagine doing when she didn't live in a bunker, but I think that environment forces you into things that you probably wouldn't have imagined doing.
Let's talk a bit more about Wolfe then.
Okay.
So she just sort of kind of arrived for you.
I wanted to do, I was very keen that it would be one voice, one perspective. I really liked the idea of her just being very flawed, because I think flawed characters are interesting. I also think we're really flawed as humans. We're trying to come across like that we're not, but we are. And unreliable narrators just really interest me. I remember I loved like The Bell Jar. I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I just like this idea, particularly in a bunker of a claustrophobic environment, where you're just getting one person's perspective, and it doesn't necessarily mean that's the right perspective all the time, but that's all you're getting, because we're the unreliable narrators of our lives. You know, we're always kind of trying to justify our own behaviour. So I think for me that felt like the most natural thing to do in the bunker. And apart from that, I just didn't want to put any limits on her. Like, I was just like, just show me what you want to do. And, you know, some things I pulled back, some things I pushed on, and my editors would have kind of comments and stuff. But on the whole, Wolfe's voice felt quite well formed from early on. So I think, I mean, I'm pretty sure it was her voice that kind of sold the book. Everyone seemed to kind of take Wolfe on board, flaws and not. But yeah, it was, Wolfe's voice was very organic. It just kind of came, and it wasn't really something that I felt I had to fight. I just let her go, let her roam. Yeah, but that's my interest, was particularly for this book, unreliable, kind of flawed female character, complex, and I didn't want her to be, I didn't want her to feel like a victim. I didn't want her to be this character that you felt like needed rescued in the novel. I wanted her to kind of have her own power and her own opinions, and actually as I got towards the end of the book, I kind of realised, well, she's the pharmacist, and actually she holds a lot of power, you know, and she's in a good position in the bunker compared to a lot of the other people. So I found that dynamic quite interesting.
So let's talk about pharmacy then. So you are a community pharmacist for years, and it's like I said, I've seen the short film Trifle that had kind of was also about a pharmacist. It's something that you kind of brought out at least 2 strands of your writing so far.
Yes, yeah.
And you hated it. This feels really interesting.
It's not that I hated it, I just found the job quite anxiety-inducing. There was a lot of responsibility, and I think particularly in community pharmacy it's quite repetitive, which is a blessing and a curse. You know, people like to have their habits, but for how long would you kind of be doing the same thing? And I think the role is changing now, so I don't want to like bag on the pharmacists, because I think they're also incredibly hardworking and actual heroes, because the job is really hard and really grueling. But for me, like, I do think it brought on a lot of anxiety, and I would really worry about the errors, because actually if you make a mistake, if a doctor prescribes something and there's an error on the prescription and you don't pick it up, you're more liable for the error. And so I would always just be kind of freaking out about, you know, overdosing a patient or giving them the wrong thing, or, you know, you hear horror stories. Like the Pharmaceutical Journal, where I used to look for jobs, also had a page where it just told you all the pharmacies that got struck off every week. And
what they did.
And what they did to get struck off. It was like proper entertainment. You'd look for a job, and then you'd look at was it someone, and there was, some of them were ridiculous. It'd be like, oh, he was selling Viagra to his friends on the golf course, you know, and that's it. And that's like you need a prescription for that. So there's loads of things. But I mean, I was a short story writer for about 8 or 9 years before I started writing The Pharmacist. And that entire time I just did not go near pharmacy. I thought it was of no interest to anybody. And I think maybe I also just felt like it was separate. Like writing had started for me as a hobby and an escapism from the profession. And then I was writing Trifle in tandem to writing The Pharmacist. And I was doing workshops and films, and they were looking for ideas, and I just pitched this idea about a pharmacist, and all of a sudden the whole room was like, oh, that sounds really interesting, we know nothing about pharmacists. And then I was like, right, I'll tell you a thing or two about being a pharmacist. And so that's how Trifle came about. And then with The Pharmacist, the novel, I get a bit lazy with research. I do it and I feel great once I've done the research, but I think as a first novel it was a way of being like, I know this. Like, I can talk about pharmacy, you know, to the cows come home. So yeah, and actually a lot of people have said it's quite interesting. It's an insight that they don't know.
Yeah, and I mean the the precarity, you really do feel it. She's counting out these prescriptions each time. She's worried. You know, there's a couple of moments where she doubts herself.
Yeah.
Has she given somebody the right prescription? Obviously, it's also a position that in a bunker situation can be exploited as well.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating into the workings of that particular society as well.
And I think when it came to the book, because it is a claustrophobic environment, I felt like the repetitiveness of being a community pharmacist lended itself quite well. When I was doing the job, you were often seeing the same patients every day. You were having more face time. You know, I think people think that the GP knows their patients really well, but actually it's the pharmacist that sees them on a very, very regular basis. And you can build up a rapport, a relationship. You know if such and such, you know, hasn't turned up for their medicine, or if there's something wrong. So it just felt like a really good way of being able for Wolfe to just access a lot of space and characters within the novel, compared to, you know, if she'd had another job in the bunker, if she'd worked in laundry or, you know, something, you wouldn't have got the same exposure with the other characters. And again, because of that position of power, that's how she ends up kind of meeting the leader and him taking a shine to her. So yeah, it felt very natural to write her as a pharmacist.
It really works. It's a really interesting kind of unthought of way into a society, definitely.
And I think it's quite a random book, and my publishers were trying to think about marketing it, and they were like, it's not easy marketing a book about a pharmacist, you know, like in a nuclear bunker. Like, you know, how I think the cover was there was a lot of delay with design, because I think it was quite difficult to capture. I mean, they've done a fantastic job now. I love the cover. But it was a challenge, at the time, to try and encapsulate everything that was in the book with the profession and the bunker. So, but they did a good job.
So, moving on from the novel for a little while, can you tell us about? Well, actually, no. We'll come back to it. We were having a quick chat there about writing as a mother of small children. And how you do that. That was like a mocking laugh, which isn't of interest to everybody. But and I did check first of all and say, are you all right with me? I have kind of before asked this question to an author, and they said, would you ask a man this? And I said, no, I'd ask them about being a father. But yes, so it's an interesting balance for me. Our children are exactly the same age, so this is basically just me being nosy here. But how do you plan writing time, especially with a book like this that requires you to be so completely switched off from reality?
Yeah.
How do you kind of?
I mean, I don't have a great answer for that. I think the kids had to put up with a lot. You know, I would divide the time out so that I was. It was actually really hard during the pandemic when I was doing the edits, because then you had no childcare. But before that, it was fine actually writing the book, because I would have childcare in place, and I knew that was my window. And I don't know if you're the same, Kirsten, but I am the most productive person when I only have 3 hours or 4 hours, compared to, you know, if I didn't have the time constraint, I'd probably be like, I'll get it done at some point. But I'm very, very efficient with my time. And then the pandemic came along, and I was in the middle of edits, and I found that really, really tough, because I was kind of working around nap times, I was working in the evenings, and also, do you really want to edit something quite bleak during a pandemic? I think it kind of took a toll on my mental health, but I also just really believed in the bunker. I really believed in the story, so I felt quite compelled to just keep going. And I think that generally you could say that about writing. You know, if you want to be a writer, you just have to graft and graft and graft, and there's no real break. And I think sometimes I need to learn what the balance is between actually having off time and writing. I feel that the boundary's very blurred even now, and I think we're all kind of guilty of burnout with pandemic. So I need to get better at that. But just setting boundaries was what I was trying to do. I do feel like my kids probably, I've kind of thanked them a lot, even though they don't really understand why, because even when I wasn't writing, you know, I'd be thinking about it, and they would ask me something, and I would just be like, what? You know, I wasn't focused. And I do think I think my life was probably easier before I was a writer, because you're never off, I don't think, when you're a writer. But I wouldn't change it because, you know, that's who I am and I love writing. And I think when I don't get a chance to write, I don't think I'm the best version of me either. I think it's quite a cathartic thing to do. So I think I'll always write, but I think it will just continue to be a juggle while the kids are young. My youngest is now in nursery. She just got her funded place, and I felt like dancing around the room. And it started on Monday, and everyone was like, "Are you excited about publication week?" And I'm like, "Yes, but I get funding like on Monday." So both kids get funded hours, and that's a huge difference. Like that feels, everything just feels manageable now compared to the last 2 years. But my friend Jan, who's a journalist, I was kind of asking her, because I just feel like I never have enough time to do, because it's not just writing, it's the admin and the emails and pitching or whatever. And her 2 kids have just left, like one's off to uni and one is, I think they're both off to uni now actually. And she was like, but I walk around the house, just been like, it's so quiet and I miss them. And I'm like, really? Really? You've got so much time now. But everything's a juggle. Everyone's got different juggles in life, so yeah.
It is a kind of pertinent question for this book, though, because even though Wolfe herself does not have children, issues of maternity are fairly kind of to the focus, to the front in the book. I don't want to spoil too much of the plot, but can we talk about just kind of that for a second and how that kind of filtered into the way that you evolved the plot, I guess? Without giving any details away. Everybody's just going to sit there going, what?
I think with Wolfe, without trying to give too much away, I wanted the perspective of somebody, you know, I can remember before having children, but wanting children and the feeling of anxiety around that, because you just feel like so much is out of your control, and then having children and it's just a different set of kind of complex emotions, and I wanted to kind of capture both sides. I know that sounds quite random, but almost both sides, but from Wolfe and another character in the novel, that both of them have kind of different approaches to motherhood and what they think motherhood is or what they imagine it to be. And just as someone that's kind of gone through the journey, it just felt quite important to incorporate. And I feel really guilty because my mum used to be a midwife, and I never ever, before I decided to have kids myself, I never asked her about the job and just the emotion of what it took to, you know, bring a baby into the world. And then I had my own kids, and I remember being like, I cannot believe you do that job and then you come home and you just have to kind of compartmentalise. I suppose you could say the same for nurses and doctors, particularly in the pandemic. But I wanted that feel in the book. The uncertainty around motherhood and what it means and how different people identify with motherhood, whether they choose to have children or they don't want children or they can't have children. I wanted to kind of have a spectrum of emotion around that. I feel like that's really cryptic without giving too much away.
You might just have to buy the book to find out. So let's kind of, we can talk about other projects as well. I wouldn't usually do this to somebody at the launch of their debut novel, but she has just told me that you've just finished book 2.
Well, nearly, yeah. It's written, yeah, it's still been edited, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's not it's a separate story to The Pharmacist, but they sit quite well together. So it's another speculative novel, more to do with climate change this time. So it's about water shortages and how we treat water, and it's set on a livestock farm on the kind of Scotland-England border. So there's a lot about migration, and again, it asks similar questions in the sense of what happens to society when something that you need water, you absolutely need water to live. What happens when that becomes scarce, and how do people behave? Do they try and bring kind of a community feel to it, or is it all very individualistic? So that's a play on those things. So again, that's book 2 next year.
Do you have a title?
It's called Thirsty Animals.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah. Hopefully, I'm in the throes of like edits in the 3rd or 4th round, so I think we're there. But yeah, it's not finished yet.
And you've also got a television project on the go.
I have a 4-part mini drama work with a production company, but I'm also doing my first feature film with BBC Film. So yeah, I think I just like being busy. I think I like just taking on like more than I can actually handle, and then like freaking out that I'm not coping. But you've got me in a good place. I managed to wrap up a lot of deadlines, so I can have a couple of weeks off for publication, and then get back to it really with the work. I mean, I just really like storytelling, and I think the screenwriting's good because it's a different set of skills, and I think both of them work well. I think I get something from each of them, and I think it makes both forms better for me. So, yeah.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions? Yep, all good. I love it when people come from.
Specifically just to match the cover between the two of you?
No.
It's good, right?
It's like a happy accident.
I'm actually cosplaying. Nobody else has read the book so you don't get I'm not any specific character. I'm just another bunker dweller in a boiler suit.
With the like kind of floral wallpaper almost in your jacket.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
there we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
It's not a question, more of a statement. I find what you're saying about, did you say you wrote it in 2018?
Yeah.
I find what you've been saying about the plot really fascinating because I think if the past 2 years hadn't have happened, I get the vibe that some of the stuff I read, I would have been like, this could happen.
Yeah.
But I feel like now I'm going to be like, this is really plausible.
Yeah, I know.
For anyone who's watching online who might not have heard.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the first question was, did we dress to match the cover of the book? No, we didn't. The second question was more of a statement, was that the book had been written in 2018, and the asker said that had they heard that plot synopsis in 2018, they would have thought, no, that could probably have happened. Now it just seems like a terrifying glimpse into the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Essentially, I'm kind of paraphrasing.
Feels less speculative now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have wanted the things that have happened in the last 2 years to happen, but it does feel like there was an insight that, again, I think it comes back to that whole idea of what's your worst fears, and sometimes your worst fears come true. Yeah, I mean, we're not in a great place, are we? You know, in the world. But I think those fears need to be captured. I think you need to write about them, and the hope that people are better to each other. If you can read things and empathise with people that have different opinions to yourself or different viewpoints, I think fiction's a really good way of accessing that, and you can kind of, without even really being conscious of it, you empathise with the character, and you can understand them in a way that you can't if you're having like an argument on Twitter. Or, you know, I just think fiction's a really great way of growing empathy, and I think we need empathy. We need a lot of empathy right now in the world. So yeah, that I agree. I'm sorry it's happening. A lot of stuff.
It is really nice that one of the things that I love about this book is that even in this brutal, completely controlled world with the worst aspects of humanity in control, people are inherently decent to each other. People are kind of compelled to create community out with the regulations, to look out for each other, to look after each other.
And I think for me, what I felt was one of the nicer things about the bunker was even when the leader is pressing down on people and being very manipulative, there's still a sense of community. People want a better life. People are trying to get together. To me, it kind of feels like, you know, before a revolution, you know, the bubblings before a revolution. That's kind of what I wanted to capture with the Pharmacist, so that it does end with a sense of there is hope. You know, things could be better. It felt a little bit like, you know, when you've done an exam and then there's nothing more you can do after it. You've got that nice little period of time before you get the result. That's how I wanted to end the book. I wanted it to be this kind of hopeful, because you don't know if, you know, whatever comes around the corner is going to be better than what you were kind of experiencing. But that was the kind of tone that I went for towards the end.
Schrodinger's higher results.
Exactly.
Any more questions?
Online, but if you want to go first.
Yeah.
How do you think you promote hope in the bunker? Like, what are the bad things happening
First off, I wouldn't be invited in the bunker because I have no practical skills whatsoever. So.
Neither do half the people in the bunker. You seem to be wealthy, I think. Yeah.
I'm not that either. I don't say
No, actually, no. That's a good question. I didn't.
I'm so sorry. I'm totally feeling this. The question was, what habits would both of us fall into if we were living in the bunker?
I never thought about that too much because I always thought, well, I absolutely would not be one of those people that was picked. I'd perish, if there was nuclear war, I wouldn't be in the bunker.
But you got pharmacy skills.
But I do, so maybe I could be Wolfe, yeah. I don't know. Part of me, when I was writing the book, made me think it'd be quite a relief not to have like makeup on, or like do your hair. Maybe that's not a bad. And I suppose the pandemic actually, I reverted to that. I was in my joggies most of the time. So I think there was that kind of sense of, do you just become really animalistic in that environment? Do you just let go of all kind of societal norms and just see what happens? I would probably, I'm trying to think, I'd probably just sleep all the time. I'd just be like, nobody talk to me. I'll just like lie under my blanket and have a snooze, because I never get to have naps now. So maybe it'd be quite nice to have a few naps in the bunker. I don't know about yourself. Do you think?
I would probably walk weird, obsessive routes and be a bit over-friendly to anybody I encountered along those routes.
Just chatting to everybody.
Yeah. So we've got a question from online.
Yes, Lucy online is asking, do you consider The Pharmacist a genre novel? And does genre play a part in how you approach your writing?
So I'll repeat the question. Hello, Lucy, online. The question is, do you consider The Pharmacist a genre novel, and does genre play a part in, I've forgotten the end of this sentence.
In your writing.
In your writing.
I would say no. I think people would say that it is a genre novel. I think when it's speculative and dystopian, people count that as a genre. My writing's very character driven, so I'm just mostly focused on the character, and whatever happens to them obviously has to move the story along, and the setting of the bunker is very important. But my focus is on character, and I think that remains the same with whatever I'm writing. But I think because it is speculative, I've created a world that doesn't exist. I was very conscious that I wanted to create a world that could exist, like that whatever I write could happen. It's maybe not happened yet, and I don't want it to happen, but it is a potential. That felt quite important. But I think genre is great, and I was saying to Kirsten before, I've been invited to lots of different festivals to talk about the book, from kind of science fiction and fantasy horror to Edinburgh Book Festival to crime festivals, and I'm like, I think that's great. It's such there's something for so many genres in fiction, and I'm here for it. Yeah.
Have we got any more questions? Yes.
So you were doing the edits during lockdown, and that must have been kind of, did that kind of help when you were in the kind of claustrophobic feeling of that? And, did you think, oh my God, I'm living with it, what am I doing? Is that kind of happening?
Yeah.
The question was asking about doing the edits during lockdown, and did that feed into the claustrophobia?
I would say absolutely. I felt worried actually, because I'd sold the book and everyone was really excited, and then we went into lockdown 3 weeks later. So my main concern at the time was, do they even want the book anymore? I had this real fear that they were just going to be like, actually, let's just rip up the contract. Like, nobody needs a story about a nuclear bunker when we're now living in a pandemic. But I think that's a really good point, because as I was editing it, there were things where things were almost easier to edit in a kind of twisted way, because there was things we'd never ever had to imagine before, and then we were living it, and so everything, in a way, everything just felt plausible. I was a bit like, I can just write anything, because look what we're doing now. We can't leave our houses. We can't go out for more than an hour a day. So actually, whatever I want to put in the bunker could happen.
Yeah. Nobody gets into sourdough bread in the bunker.
No, that's probably for the best. Yeah.
Have we got time for one more question? Yeah. Is there one more?
Also one online.
Yeah.
You can take one of each while you have.
We've also got a short reading to finish up once all the questions are done. So we'll do one online and then one more in person.
So Pat says, who are the contemporary writers you were excited about?
The question is, who are the contemporary writers you're excited about? Hello, Pat.
Hello. I mean, probably one of my most favourite contemporary writers is Ottessa Moshfegh. I pretty much love everything that she does, and she's a huge Ottessa Moshfegh. So she wrote like My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I love her style. I just think she's really fearless as a writer, and she has no boundaries. She just kind of goes, and I would say that with her fiction novels and her short stories. I love the fact that she's fearless and bold. And I'm not saying that I'm anywhere near as good a writer as her, but I just think that she's someone to really respect and kind of think her craft is really tight.
And one more in-person question. Anybody? No. Well, we could just finish up with another little read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here's my book.
Yeah, it's here. Do you need me to hold?
Thank you. Oh. Very, very professional with my post-its now. I've made it.
I did one with napkins the other day.
Oh, really? So I'm going to read an extract that's a little bit further into the book, and Wolfe is about to meet the leader for the first time. So she's kind of beginning to get an insight that he lives a different life to the rest of them in the bunker. I was passed to a different soldier, and he was ushering me into a room where there was no more concrete. Instead, there was plush carpet and floral wallpaper. And as we walked, an electric impulse passed from me to the soldier. It was like the carpets in Las Vegas casinos. They had always seemed to give me a static shock for some reason. It had freaked Daniel out, and he refused to hold my hand for fear of me shocking him. These memories of Daniel always arrived without warning, often painfully like a winding in the chest, and I begrudged his ability to so effortlessly alter my train of thought. Chrome fixtures and antique furniture surrounded me. Lilies protruded from a vase, and I couldn't help but reach out and touch them. They were made of silk, but for the briefest of moments I imagined them to be real, that pollen might fall from their stems and stain my boiler suit. It hadn't occurred to me that our leader would be living a more bearable life. Perhaps I had been foolish to think otherwise, cheated into believing we were all in the same boat. But here I was, gripping the leaf of an artificial lily in what could only be described as his hallway. The soldier yanked me back. Sit, he said, directing me to a cushioned seat pressed up against the floral wallpaper. It really was like being in a hotel lobby. Perhaps behind one of the many doors I'd been met with a blackjack table and slot machines. We seemed to wait for a long time. The soldier stood with his rifle pointed to the ground, his fingers hovering next to the trigger. Please, I said, I haven't done anything. He stared at me. It was you who requested this meeting with our leader. He shifted his stance and the gun shifted with him, bobbing slightly next to his hip. But I never asked to speak with him. So you no longer want to see him? I'm about to meet him. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen our leader in the flesh. We were told that underlying health conditions prevented him from circulating among us, that he was forced to shield and protect his immune system. And I imagined him as a prophet now, busy carving out the pages of his own holy doctorate. If his intention was to create some aura of mystery, then it appeared to be working, because as I sat there, all thoughts of my own safety disappeared, and I was filled with an anxious excitement. One of the doors opened, and a woman in a black tailored skirt and blazer stood over the threshold. We're ready for you now, she said, speaking with a voice that was so familiar to me. Are you the voice we hear on the speaker system, I said, marvelling, almost leering at her. My name's Alison. It was bizarre hearing someone's first name being spoken. First names were redundant in the main chamber. Surnames were enough to identify family groupings, but names assigned at birth were considered a cast-off from a life that no longer existed. Suddenly I realised how ridiculous I looked in my boiler suit. Her outfit was so striking that I needed to touch it, and as she came to where I was sitting, I ran my hand over the seam of the fabric. She stood, letting me feel the material before clearing her throat. We don't have much time, she said, finally pulling her skirt free from my grip. The soldier had to force me up onto my feet, and I clung to my blankets, the legs of my spare boiler suit dangling in front of me. You can leave your things here, Alison said. I glanced at the seat I'd been sitting in and back to her. Your belongings are safe here. No one will take them. She held a clipboard, and I focused on the metal lever that lodged paper in place. I had this urge to place my finger underneath the springs and feel its pressure, allow its weight to indent my finger. Of all the things that surrounded me, it was the clipboard I found myself lusting for the most.
Wine, and we have books.
Wine and books.
You are happy to scribble
I am, yes.
in them, so we have pens.
Okay.
Um,
Perfect.
so, will you all join me? It's so lovely to be in a space together where you're not like weirdly clapping alone to the Zoom room. Am I the only one who's done it? So one more time for our amazing writer for this brilliant book.
Oh.
Oh my God.
Where did that come from?
People throwing things.
Just a bit.
Are you okay?
A bit of water.
It wasn't very funny. Please don't do it again. Okay. Maybe.
Slightly terrifying.
Doesn't look like bunkers.
We applauded. They